Good morning, everybody. I'd very much like to welcome you to the Dies Natalis Symposium of the Wageningen Graduate Schools. My name is Bas Zwaan and I'll be your host and moderator for this morning. Today, Wageningen University celebrates its 104th birthday, so happy birthday to you all. I welcome you here in the spot, but obviously also all the people online that are watching this very nice program, I think, today. So the symposium traditionally highlights the research that's going on in the Wageningen research schools. And also this year we make explicitly the link to the theme of this year's Dies Natalis celebration, namely education. We do this in several ways. Before the break, we will have examples of the pitches of research on education. After the break, we have examples of how research and education interact and how this interaction strengthens both. We will also see the presenters that came from our own master program and successfully wrote and obtained their own PhD project through the Wageningen Graduate School Talent Program. And this is not all, because after the break we also have an award ceremony, namely of the Wageningen University Fund Research Award. A lot to look forward to and a lot to enjoy, and I hope you indeed will enjoy this morning symposium. And I would very much like to welcome Kazem, the first speaker of this morning, and he'll be talking about improving student essays through online peer review.
Thanks, Bas, for the introduction. Dear audiences, my name is Kazem Banihashem. I'm a postdoctoral researcher in education and learning science, and today I'm going to talk about using peer feedback as an effective instructional strategy to improve students' argumentative essay writing. Our team consists of 3 people. We have Omid Nourouzi, Associate Professor from Education and Learning Science Group, as the project leader. We also have Harm Beemans on board as the project advisor, and also I'm working in this project as the main executor. So the argumentation is a common but also critical activity in higher education. In general, argumentation refers to the process of using different reasons in a systematic way to support your action, your theory, your topic, or your idea. In higher education, teachers expect students to be able to critically argue their reasons and provide logical reasons on scientific controversial topics. So the argumentation is an important and also critical factor for success in higher education. Argumentation happens in different disciplines. For example, in social science and psychology, some scholars believe that kids should play game because it helps them to be a problem solver, or it helps them to enhance their memory. But also, on the other hand, some other scholars believe that playing game may cause social disconnection, may cause aggressive behavior among kids, or also in other different, such as food science. There are a controversial topic about genetically modified organisms. Some people disagree and some people agree with it. In higher education, normally students practice their argumentation by writing an argumentative essay. Teachers normally give students a topic, a controversial topic, and ask them to write an argumentative essay about the topic. But I'm afraid not all students are aware of what are the elements of high-quality argumentative essay writing. So, according to the literature, the good argumentation consists of introduction on the topic. It also contains a position in favor of the topic. It contains arguments and also justifications about the topic. Which justifications, I mean that giving scientific facts, references to support your argumentation. And also it should contain counter-arguments to see the others out of the box, what other people think. And also justifications for counter-arguments, and finally, responses to those counter-arguments and making a conclusion. So this is the elements for high-quality argumentative essay according to the literature. that, as I said, I'm afraid not all students are aware of that. So what we do expect in higher education, we expect teachers to go one by one, provide feedback for students, but just imagine a class, an online class with 100, 200 students. Is it possible for a teacher to go reading single essays and provide peer feedback? It, in fact, causes lots of workload, and it is almost, due to high workload, it is not really feasible. So what do we suggest is giving feedback, which could be used as an effective instructional strategy to improve students' argumentative essay writing. But the point about peer feedback is that not all students know what to say and how to say. So this is the question about the feedback, that giving a good quality feedback requires skills. And that's why scholars suggest that peer feedback should be supported. That's why in our project we introduced our online supported peer feedback tool. So according to the elements of high quality argumentative essay writing, which those 8 elements, we created guiding questions, which contains mentioning whether these elements, for example, introduction, is mentioned in the essay or not. And also we ask students to give motivational feedback, which contains words such as, you have done a good job, I really enjoyed reading your essay. This kind of feedback helps students to ease the atmosphere between the feedback provider and feedback receiver. And also identification. What is the problem in the essay? And why this is the problem? Because in some cases, if we don't explain to the feedback receiver why this is the problem, he or she may not even accept as feedback. And also in the end, recommendations and what are the suggestions for your peer to improve his or her essay. So these are the key elements for a good feedback that we create in a rubric for students, and they use it to give feedback for their peers. So when we have this peer feedback ready, we created a module in Brightspace, which contains 3 weeks. For the first week, we asked the students to write an original essay. For the second week, we asked students to give this peer feedback tool to give feedback to their peers. And finally, in the third week, we asked students to revise their own original essay based on the feedbacks they have received from peers. When we have these modules ready, we embedded these modules in 5 different courses at bachelor and master level. For example, food science, social science, environmental science. And why we run these modules in different courses? Because we wanted to see that whether it is possible to use this tool in different courses on a large scale or not. And in the end, we asked students in terms of their learning satisfaction, whether they were happy with this module or not. So now let's talk about the result. For the peer feedback performance, in general, we are happy to see that all the students in their feedback, they use all key elements, such as the motivational feedback, constructive feedback, cognitive feedback. However, there are rooms for improvement. Still, although, for example, for motivational feedback, we see that the large number of, it contains a high quality, like until the number 2, which means that it's a really good number for the motivational feedback. While on the other hand, for identification and for justification, still there are rooms for improvements. In terms of argumentative essay writing, our results for the first year showed that all students in all different courses made an improvement from original essay to the revised essay, which indicates that our peer feedback tool was useful to improve students' essay writing. And when we compare in different education levels among bachelor and master's students, we can see that, again, there's an improvement from original essay to the revised essay. However, the master's students did a better job from the beginning. And the reason for this good job could be related to the master's students. They have more experiences, they have more knowledge, how to write an essay. So it could be a reason for such finding. And also, when we compare among different courses, we again can see that in all 5 courses, we made an improvement. Students made an improvement. However, in some courses, from the beginning, students did a good job. For example, as you can see, the red line, which belongs to the social science group, has the highest performance, students in this group, which maybe, again, one interpretation could go back to the fact that in social science, maybe students are dealing with more controversial issues. And in terms of the learning satisfaction, in general, students were happy with this module. So as you can see, the bar chart for overall satisfaction is close to the 4, which indicates satisfaction. However, for the ease of the use of the module, we can see the highest number, which means that students found this module easy to use and not really complex, which is good. So, and then let's talk about the real added value of this project. What does really brings to both teachers and students? First, as our results showed, that this tool can be used for improving students' argumentative essay writing, which means that if you are a teacher, if you are dealing with the argumentation, you can use this tool. The second one is that our experiences showed that students are really active in the process. They provide feedback, they receive feedback, they read the essays, they reflect on the feedback. So these kind of activities represents the active engagement in the learning process. And also that since we provided a structure for students to give feedback, we believe that it helps students to improve their feedback competency. And also the good thing about this module is that it doesn't really need intervention from teachers' sides. Based on our experiences with 5 courses, which we had, students simply can follow this module by themselves. And since peer feedback can be used instead of teacher feedback, especially on a large scale for like 200 students, we believe that using this tool can help students to decrease their workload. In the end, I would like to thank you for your attention, and please let me know if you have any question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very interesting presentation. So there's an opportunity now for questions. We have about 5 minutes for that. Who can I welcome to ask the first question? There's also an opportunity to do this online. I have a very fancy tablet where I get these questions. I don't see any questions from the online audience yet, so I'm relying on the audience here. Who can I give the word? Tidi in the back.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for a nice presentation. I was very intrigued by this. You showed that you have investigated the different types of sciences, environmental, food, etc. And I was wondering if there was any difference between those groups of students in those sciences, if they reacted differently. Because you made one remark that intrigued me, that social sciences has more controversial issues, and I'm not sure I agree with that.
Thank you for your question. This is a really nice question. I would say that in different courses, the results showed that students in general made an improvement, but there is also a question about what does really, if the content does really matter when you provide an essay. Since our argumentative peer feedback tool relied on the structure of the essay instead of the content of the essay, we would say that using this tool in different course domains can be helpful, even though it does not really matter what are the topic, because the tool is basically relied on the structure of the essay, not the content of the essay. And also about the social science, that was just one interpretation and it could be wrong.
Ken.
Yeah, maybe to ask Ken Gill. I mean, I worked for 15 years in the UK university system before I came to Wageningen. What really struck me here was how numerate students were compared to the UK system, but how poor they were at writing essays. actually, because they get, certainly in the natural sciences, they get very little practice in essay writing. So I really applaud you on your initiative. But I do think on the natural sciences, the whole idea of putting up constructive arguments in an essay is not explored particularly well in our education. It's something that we really should strengthen. So just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, thanks for you.
Want to respond to that?
Yeah, it's a comment, and I also agree with that. I think in natural science, we don't really focus on the controversial topics as much as we do in maybe in social science and psychology. And the main reason, not the main reason, but one reason could be related to the fact that we have more, let's say, ethical or the social dilemmas in the humanities, rather than the facts, the scientific facts in natural sciences. That could be one reason maybe for that.
Yeah, I think that's a bold statement. Yes, sure. Microphone, please, here in the front. Sorry, we have to wait for the microphone, otherwise people online can't hear it. So.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I enjoyed it very much. My name is Marianne Mak. I would like to ask you, how did you develop your tool? Did you use theory to do that? Did you have a theoretical framework? And you proposed, or you told us that the results of your students improve. They are also very satisfied. But I was wondering, did you also expand theory a little bit with your study? Could you say something about that?
For sure, yeah. That's actually a nice question, and I would say that our theory our peer feedback tool was built both on research and literature, the theory, and also the practice. So I don't know whether you are familiar with the Toulmin's theory in terms of the argumentation. And we have what we did, which actually this tool, we did look into the literature, what was the argumentation quality, and what in different studies and theories, they looked for the core elements of the good argumentation, and then we wrap all them together and try to, to extract the key elements for the argumentation part. And for the feedback part, we did the same thing. We went through all the studies that has been, not all the studies, but the key studies in the field of peer feedback, and we discovered the key elements for the feedback, and then we tried to wrap them and contextualize them in the argumentative essay writing. So I would say it contains there's actually theory behind this tool.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We have to leave it at this. Thank you very much, Kazem, again for your nice presentation.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks.
So, in the meantime, Yolie has joined me on stage, and she will be the next presenter, and she'll be talking about coupling a course assignment to PhD research. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Bas. Are you a student? Or were you a student? Maybe weeks, months, or even years ago? I hope that you look back on all those assignments you did and the thesis you might have written, thinking how much you've learned from them and how they enabled you to develop and improve skills. But isn't it a shame? All that blood, sweat, and tears, and after grading, nobody looks at it again. That is a problem that we wanted to solve, and I'm going to tell you how we tried to do that. So let's go back in time a little bit. About a year ago, my colleagues, Esther and Anke, were traveling by train to Wageningen University, talking about the course Eating, Customs and Health. And they were saying to each other, every year there are about 60 students, and they all do 2 interviews. That's 120 interviews. That's so much data, and nothing happens with it. It just ends up on a pile. What a waste. Can't we do something with that? why don't we connect PhD research to the course assignment? Isn't it much more fun to work on something that someone else is going to use? So that is how Esther and Anke came to me. I am a PhD candidate, and my research focuses on meat consumption and transitioning towards more plant-based consumption. So my research topic fit the course content very well. So we completed the team with Hans Dagevos, who is a consumption sociologist and knows a lot about meat consumption and thus the course assignment. And Selke Riedel, who is a bachelor student, and that is pretty special. I'm going to get back to that later. But first, I'm going to tell you what it is that we did exactly. So we created a course assignment with a research question relevant for my PhD research. You might have noticed that lately there's a lot more attention for plant-based foods. In the supermarket, for example, meat substitutes and other vegetarian and vegan products are taking a larger proportion of the supermarket shelves, right? So we expected that for the future, it will become more common that some people do eat meat and others do not. How does that affect eating together? That is the question that the students of the course Eating Customs and Health worked on in the context of Wageningen students. How did that process go exactly? Well, the lecturing team and the students created an interview guide together. The students formed in groups of 4 students. They practiced their interview in a practical. Each student recruited 2 respondents and conducted 2 interviews with a vegetarian in an omnivorous household or vice versa. They exchanged the interviews with another group, so they analyzed double the interviews, and they reported their findings in a short paper. And while reading and grading these papers, my colleague Esther assessed whether these results were interesting and whether it would be relevant to analyze all the interviews together with the team. Fortunately, this was the case. For example, we found that Wageningen students are very accepting and tolerant towards each other's eating styles. And they emphasize that everybody should eat what they want. And they find ways to eat together, regardless of the differences. So after grading the papers, Esther asked the students who would be interested to be involved in writing a publication about these findings with us. And this is when Selke joined our team, a bachelor student who followed the course, and currently we're writing an article together. Why does this add value to education? Well, first of all, the course has a bigger purpose. It's not just about the individual learning outcomes, but students contribute to real research, to scientific literature. How many times have you thought, when making an assignment, who cares? In this case, someone cared. The students knew that a PhD candidate was waiting for their work and was happy with it, and we hope that this motivated them. And then the opportunity to write a publication, which is a great learning experience by itself. And in terms of research, it was very valuable to be able to gather data of 120 interviews in a relatively short time span. We could have never done that ourselves in that time. And also, it's much easier to recruit respondents via students. Although there are some implications regarding representation of the group when you do that, of course. And then one of my own primary motivations to join this project was to explore whether this research question would harvest interesting results. I think that as a researcher, you can really use such course assignments to test questions, methodologies, and theories. Well, this all sounds a little bit too good to be true, doesn't it? And yes, we did this for the first time, so we identified some risks, and that will help us to mitigate risks in the future. Because what happens if many students are interested in writing the publication? And how do you control the research process if 60 students are executing the research? How do you know for sure that they actually did the interviews? And how do you maintain the quality of the interviews with first-year bachelor students that are not yet experienced with interviewing? And I will give you 2 examples of risks regarding the interviews. So this is the first one. Looking at this example, you kind of miss the why question, right? Could you elaborate a little further on that, please? The follow-up question. And although we practiced follow-up questions during the practical, we noticed in the transcripts that students were hesitant to do this. So we know that for next time, we need to focus more on asking these follow-up questions so that students will feel confident to actually do this during the interview. And then this example. So for this question just isn't a right response, right? Like, what do you mean? This is an example of previous years, when students made their own interview guides, and during the practical, they would find out that some questions just don't work. You don't get the right answer, and there was always a big learning experience that was missed this year. But for our project, we needed everybody to ask the same good questions. So as a lecturer, you also have to make some tough decisions. But isn't that always the case with giving a course? So why is this transformative form of linking research to education valuable for Wageningen University? Why should we invest more in this? I have a lot of reasons, but I don't have the time to give them. So I will give you 3. I will highlight 3 reasons. So for lecturers, lecturing is often a period where scientists put a pause on their research. And with education in this form, they don't have to do this. And then for students, isn't it super cool to see the data that you collected back in a published paper? Or a published paper back on your CV even before you graduated? And then for a PhD researcher, and I speak from experience here, it is super awesome to work together with 60 students on your own research. The project I just presented to you is rather new and experimental, and we truly believe in this approach, and it warrants more experimentation. So we hope that we have inspired you to also experiment with this in order to broaden the horizons of students, of lecturers, and of researchers through establishing a link between research and education. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very intriguing presentation. So first, I'd like to apologize to Marieke, who typed something in the chat, but I wasn't able to make out her question. But maybe it's even relevant for this presentation. So maybe Marieke, if you think this is true as well, type this in, and I will ask the question. The audience, who can I give the floor here? Because I don't see yet any question in the chat online. Maybe I can start a ball rolling, if I may, because oh, there's the question. No, yeah, it's a compliment. Sorry, it's not a question. So I have a bit of experience with the same, and I see the pitfalls that you highlight. So the students have to learn to do the interviews. They may not do it all in the same way, but it's also an opportunity, for instance, to research how the end result of say, a questionnaire or an interview depends on the interview style. Have you considered that? So in other words, maybe you could split your student groups into 2, one using your very nicely polished predetermined set, and the one that they come up themselves, and then compare these results. Have you considered something like that?
Thank you for your question. That's very interesting. And I personally have not considered that. My role was more the researcher in this project, so I was less involved in the educational aspects. So I'm not sure whether my colleagues have thought about this to do this in the future, maybe. But I think it's a really nice idea. Yes, for sure.
Yeah, intriguing. There's a question in the audience. Janneke, if you can. And maybe for the technical people, I have a message on my iPad, but I can't do anything with it, and it says keep it short. I'm not sure whether it refers to me or to somebody.
That was directed at me, obviously, so I'll keep it very short. Thank you. Edward Huibens, Chair of the Cultural Geography. Happy to see colleagues of mine, Esther and Anke, working with you, and I have something to chat about over the next drink we have. But no, I was just wanting to, I mean, to me, it's made a comment, very inspirational, thank you. So it sort of adds a new perspective onto the what we try to do with thesis rings and identifying thesis topics, both at master and bachelor level. So we try to integrate that with ongoing research and projects. But here you take it one step further, literally integrating it into the lecture room with small-scale projects and recruiting 60 students. I mean, fascinating, and thank you for identifying the challenges there too. Right. That was sort of a comment, I guess. Short.
Thank you so much.
So Marika actually said she agreed with me that the question is relevant here too. And that has to do whether the intercultural aspects was taken into account. So this was also for your, but now I'm asking Yolie here. So intercultural differences, were they taken into account in this research project?
Thank you for the question, Marika. Very nice question. We did not take intercultural aspects into account. The target group was Wageningen students, and we didn't include any questions that asked for ethnic background or the native country. No, we did not do that. So
okay, well,
for next time, it's good feedback. Thank you.
Last question, a quick one, hopefully, maybe.
My name is Hans Winkels. Thank you for the presentation. Actually, in the 80s of the last century, I was the mediator in a vegetarian student group. So luckily, they were tolerant then too. But the question that I have is, did you also give feedback of what you did with the results to all the 60 students? Or is that still coming?
Thank you. We are going to share the paper with the students, obviously. We have already spoken about that. They were first-year students, so when will we publish it? And will they still study in Wageningen? Because that's also the question, of course, like, can you still reach them? So we're definitely going to do that. We haven't shared preliminary results in between. No, would you recommend to do that?
If you want to keep them motivated and keep them thinking and involved, that would be an option. But it's up to you, of course, because I'm not going to do your work.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for this nice interaction, and thank you, Yolie, for your presentation.
Thank you, Bas. Thank you all.
Welcome. So, joined on stage with me is Koos, and he'll be talking about improving education with PhD projects, and he will showcasing the very nice. I am also using LabBuddy, so I'm a fan. But you're going to explain everything about this. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Bas, for the kind words. Yeah, so today I would like to make a case to improve our education using PhD projects, and I will illustrate that with LabBuddy. LabBuddy is the company I founded after I graduated as a PhD student here in Wageningen. So what is LabBuddy? LabBuddy is an evidence-informed way of conducting laboratory education. So it's based on principles we found in scientific literature, supported by an e-learning tool. A dedicated e-learning tool which was specifically built to bring these educational guidelines into practice. And it is brought to other universities by a spin-off of Wageningen University. And to give you an example, this is a selection of the universities currently using LabBuddy, so not all, but yeah, we started in Wageningen, of course, that's why it's in the center, but we moved to other universities in the Netherlands, and now we're also going abroad. So LabBuddy was designed at food chemistry in the good old Biotechnion building as a PhD project, part-time, and the promoter was Harry Guppen, who is also in the audience. I'm very glad for that. And it was part of a larger attempt to improve education with PhD students. So I was not the only one, there were like 8 other PhD students before me who also improved education as a topic of their PhD research. And that was because the shareholders and people in the university were of the opinion that continuous improvement of education is necessary by chair groups. And why? First, because they thought, and also people in literature, for example, this person who wrote in Nature, that education is a core responsibility of a university. And that's why we should continuously improve. Secondly, especially in the master phase, much education is closely linked to research. And research, there are new findings which have to be implemented in education as well. So that's why you have to improve. Thirdly, if we don't improve, others will. And so we should be ahead of other universities. Wageningen has now been for the 17th time in a row the best university in the Netherlands, and congratulations. But of course we want to keep it like this. So the way we did it was by means of design-oriented research, and we really believe that this can improve education. But what does this research type entail? Well, it takes place on the intersection of 3 fields, being subject matter. So, for example, I was not trained as an educational scientist, but I'm trained as a bioprocess engineer, and I worked at the department of the laboratory of food chemistry. So subject matter is really important here. Secondly, we, of course, bring in all the knowledge from learning science. And finally, because of all the opportunities it gives, ICT. So on this, in this green area in the middle, the intersection of these 3 fields, there is where design-oriented research takes place. And usually it works like this, that you first define a number of challenges, which you translate to requirements, requirements for the design. And then you come up with a design, which you implement and evaluate, and you have like a small design cycle. And the output of this type of research is threefold: digital learning materials, research papers, and also expert teachers, because the person doing the research not only dives into the subject matter, but also learns a lot about learning science and ICT. So when this PhD student graduates, he or she is really an expert teacher. So to give you an example, how was the LabBuddy laboratory manual designed? So what I did as a PhD student, I was involved in a real laboratory class. So I was a teaching assistant there. So what I did was I put voice recorders in the pockets of all my colleague teachers, and I recorded the interactions between students and teachers in the laboratory. So that gave me 300 hours of, often not too interesting audio, but I listened to that and tried to find out if things were happening, what was happening there. And of course, I combined this with findings from educational literature. And based on these two, I came up with a number of challenges, and two of them I will mention here. First of all, that much time in the laboratory was, you could say, lost on very simple, factual questions, like, where can I find this? What does this look like? What's in my beaker glass? Very simple, factual questions, and there was not much discussion going on about the findings, about doing science. Secondly, we noticed that students were suffering from a lot of unnecessary cognitive load. And that's a construct from literature, but it has to do with that your brain is capable of processing only a limited amount of information at the same time. And up to 5 things at the same time. And if you enter into such a lab course where there are all kinds of other students, there are new equipment, there are all kinds of new things you have to do. There's so much information you have to process as a student that your brain is just incapable of doing that. And our main hypothesis was back then that this also had to do with the way the laboratory, the printed laboratory manual was designed. So based on this, we came with 2 design requirements. We should design something which saves teachers and students time, and also it should be very easy to use, because if we would design something which would introduce even more cognitive load, then the problem would not be really solved. So eventually we designed a web-based laboratory manual, which was then introduced in the real course, and tested and evaluated there. And based on these findings, we wrote a research paper which was published. So that was my job as a PhD student, but the design itself was also used afterwards in other courses. I told you I was a part-time PhD student, and that was because other teachers also wanted to use this web-based lab manual in their courses. So I got extra time to build it for those teachers. What is then the impact of design-oriented PhD projects, of which I was one of these projects? First of all, a lot of high-quality e-learning materials were being created. Some are already in use for 20 years. Of course, there were some minor changes over time, and they were also used by thousands of students already. Secondly, a number of research papers was being published, and also 8 dissertations. Thirdly, 3 expert teachers, 2 of them are still working at the Wageningen University. One is working in Zurich, but they really, they are now really involved, stayed involved with education. And lastly, a spin-off company was found, and which brings the findings also to other universities worldwide. So, what would then, to close, my ideal for Wageningen University? Well, if it was up to me, each chair group should have a PhD student improving education. And the chair group and the chair group holder is really in the center here, because it really should take place where education is given, so at the chair groups. Of course, it's always good in an organization like a university to make someone responsible who can initiate this kind of research and also can support chair groups, for example, in finding funding. And, well, maybe the Dean of Education would be a good person to start with, or he could, of course, delegate it to another entity within the university. In my time, there was a dedicated business unit who did give this support and also helped with finding funding. Secondly, the IT department should also support these students, because probably they will come up with new fancy techniques, which should be supported. And the Education Learning Science Group could help with to give educational insights. So what would be the benefits for students? Of course, improved education, because they really will get high quality education. For the chair also improved education, and he or she will get these expert teachers. And of course also the research output. And the expert teachers, because the PhD student, like I noticed, well, they might become a teacher when they graduate. For the university, also improved education is a great benefit, and maybe more spin-off companies for a startup, a start life here. How great would it be if there would also be educational spin-offs? So Wageningen University has been, yeah, like I said, best university for the 70th time in a row. But I would say, let's aim for 50. Why not? It's possible. Thank you.
Oops, thank you very much. There's time for one question, because otherwise we're running too much out of time. Who can? Ah, there's a question in the back. I don't think they do this for teasing you, Janneke, but yeah, exactly. Good exercise, yes.
Yeah, thank you for your nice presentation. I know that LabBuddy is used already in many courses at Wageningen University, but do you have an idea of what percentage of the lab-based courses already uses LabBuddy in Wageningen, at Wageningen University?
Ooh, thank you for your question. No, I only know a number. It's over 200, I would say. That's the number I have, but I don't know the total number of.
About 1,400, I remember, something like that. Tini, is that correct?
Yeah, maybe 1,400 courses,
yeah,
but
not
all lab-based courses.
Yeah.
So that would be. But yeah, I hear very positive experience from the LabBuddy. So
great to hear.
I think it's good to have this implemented here. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, one question, or should I? I'm now looking at the director. No, okay. Thank you, Koos, again, and thank you for making such a wonderful tool. That's the only thing I can say. I don't have any shares in your company, so thank you. So people, it doesn't get any better, because there are now two bosses on stage. So Bas van den Berg, and he will be talking about connecting university education with societal transition challenges. The floor is yours.
I'll try my best. I also feel I have to be a bit fast for the program, so I'll do my best. Thank you for the honor of being here today. I'm the acting coordinator of a research center in The Hague, Mission Zero, and an external candidate here. I'm going to talk about an emerging field of education called regenerative education that aims to connect universities with some of the grand challenges of our times. For many of you, this report is probably familiar. It was published about a week ago, and to be really honest, when I read it, I didn't sleep that night. And not because there's anything particularly new about the impact of climate change in the report, but the context of it being presented by some of the world's biggest diplomats really upset me personally. Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General, said, the rich countries collectively are guilty of setting arson to our only home. And that impacts me as a teacher, as an educator, as a researcher. What many of you probably know is that we are dealing with times of interconnected crises. On multiple fronts, we are transgressing, going beyond, disrupting the social and ecological foundations and barriers that allow humanity to thrive, that allow life to thrive on the earth. Part of these transitional times also call for large-scale transformations. Transformations in what Daniel Wall would call the way that the human presence on the earth is designed. Wageningen University itself is also committed to a fundamental 6 of these transitions, acting on them, like new forms of food, new forms of circular economy, well-being. This also raises an educational question. If we are committed to tackling these transitions, how do we then ensure that our education connects with these transition challenges? How do we make sure that our students have an opportunity to engage in tackling some of these grand challenges that will impact them probably more than it does us now and their children and grandchildren. That's exactly what the emerging field of regenerative education in the literature aims to do, to connect with these types of transition challenges with the intention of bringing back those transgressed barriers into the safe and just, equitable space for humanity. What we don't know yet is how to do that. And that's what we've been trying to figure out, and we are not there yet, so please consider this all as work in progress. What we've done is a podcast-based study. So we essentially interviewed 26 different educators all over Western Europe who are already engaged in this practice, in connecting their education with some of these grand challenges like circular economy, the energy transition, or the transition towards a plant-based protein. One thing we also asked each of the guests was to highlight how they would describe such a form of education, or what they would hope for such a form of education. And we've asked them to do that in the form of a metaphor, which we visualized. I'm a designer by training, so I really like to draw, which you may notice. One of the guests on the left highlighted that for students, engaging with transition challenges in such a way is a bit like learning to swim in the open seas. There may be some buoys along the way to help guide you, but it's really hard. It's really difficult to connect with transitions. It's really difficult to connect with real-world systemic change that has a lot of different multi-stakeholders. Another guest highlighted how these forms of education could act as a form of a lighthouse, illuminating the future of a particular challenge that we're heading towards in a particular place, assessing whether that fits in those boundaries, and if not, proposing alternatives. How can we redirect it? Can we make changes? Now, because there's more than 20 hours of audio, it's a bit less than the previous guest, and I don't have the time or your patience, I think, to play all 20 hours. I would like to let you in on a little teaser. So here's 2 small bits of 2 different episodes with some of these educators.
If every student feels like they're part of a bigger thing, like something that matters, something that is required now, and we always need something that is both urgent and relevant. So it needs to be important, and it needs to be important now.
And it's not easy. I sometimes literally feel my heart race when I come up with ideas of letting go of parts of control and keeping half of my curricula open and undesigned when going into a course. Handing over the design of a final role-play assignment in my master course into the hands of 3 or 4 students, which will completely design the final assessment and evaluation, including the form, together with me, but it's really in their hands. And letting go of that control is it's a leap of faith every time again.
Yeah, perhaps we need a bit more leaps of faith to be able to tackle some of these grand challenges. Like I said, we've conducted 26 of these episodes, interviews ranging from 40 to about 80 minutes, so some of them are quite long. What we've done with them is using a method called narrative of transition mapping, which combines insights from applied narratology, or the science of stories, and transition design, or an approach to create systemic change, to try and find relational patterns, to try and find patterns across all of these different contexts in Western Europe, to see how are these educators, how are these trailblazers actively connecting their practice with transition challenges. In doing so, we identified 7 fundamental design practices that occurred across all 26 examples, 21 design questions that can help guide educators in redesigning or designing their own practice to engage with transition challenges, as well as 21 barriers that have to be navigated as a teacher, as a student, as an institution when doing so. And many of them were actually psychological, mostly our own fears as a teacher, like the guest just highlighted. We're now in the process of translating this into a workshop toolkit, in an approach, in a set of items that can be used by educational design teams, so students, teachers, researchers, practitioners, business people, together active on those transition challenges. To do that, we've been working on many different iterations of trying to translate all of these 26 interviews into something that people can easily and intuitively work with. There's a few walls in my house that are just filled with these types of drawings. But this is the working version that we have now. So this is the Regenerative Education Design Practices Toolkit. In the outer parts, you can see the 7 design practices that were identified from all of these educational trailblazers, like tackling a relevant and urgent transition challenge. So tackling something with your education that means something for the students, that means something for the politicians, for the practitioners. Cultivating personal transformations. Engaging with this is difficult. It's like swimming in the sea. It changes you as well as it changes the system. Or being open for emergence. Reality is complex. Sometimes things change. We have to make adaptations in our educational design. What you also see is that there's multiple arrows going in different directions to identify or to highlight that this is also, engaging with these practices is also a design practice. It's not a blueprint that we are creating that we can give and say, this is now a course that connects with transitions. We're trying to identify the different ingredients, and much like in MasterChef, where sometimes they will give you a mystery box, you can give the same ingredients, but someone will create a completely different meal. But the magic is in the cooking. As I'm getting close to finishing, there's something I would like to share that I also share with my own students when I'm teaching. That's questions or gifts. And there's very few questions that are, or there's better few gifts, sorry, than better questions to give or to receive. And I'm very much looking forward to receiving some gifts from you in a few minutes. Before I do that, I would like to give you some in return. So what if our education, all of our education, could connect with some of the grand challenges of our times in our local context and places using some of these practices? What if all universities in the Netherlands, maybe even beyond, could be transformed in a way that they tackle these grand challenges? The theme of this year's DS is rethinking higher education for 2030 and beyond. So my hope is that by 2030, any student going through Wageningen or any other university will get to meaningfully engage with a form of regenerative education, to make a change, to meaningfully engage with one of these transition challenges. Using the QR code, we'll send you to a webpage where there's a summary of the different podcast episodes and the major streaming platforms on Apple, Google, etc. And I'll leave this on during the Q&A so you can take out your phone and have a look if you're interested. And I'd like to leave you with one of my favorite quotes about education in the latest book of Gert Biesta, the philosopher. He says, "Education is a thoroughly practical art, and educational sciences ought to inform the artistry of others." My hope, our hope, working on this project is that with the tool, with the podcast, with the study, we may play a small role in informing your artistry. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I found it very inspirational, personally. Questions from the audience and also online. There's a bit of a lag, so I'd first like to invite people in the audience here so that people online can type their question. Any comments, questions from the audience? So I don't see any hands. So, sorry. So yeah, no. I'm blinded by the light. That's a lovely song, by the way, Blinded by the Light. But.
Good morning, and thank you very much for the inspiring presentation. It really triggered me. My name is Rio Pals. I organize student challenges outside of the curriculum. We just had a conversation about challenge-based learning in education, actually. And I was wondering, where do you see the differences and the similarities between regenerative education and challenge-based learning?
Well, first of all, it's a great question, so thank you. So where are the differences between challenge-based learning and regenerative education? I would like to say that I would see challenge-based learning as part of a regenerative approach, where it was also one of the 7 main design practices that were identified. But that alone is not enough. And also just only doing that in the extracurricular parts of the program, I would really much like to inspire and make the case that that's something that should become part of the standard bachelor and master's approach. So I would like to see it as part of, yeah.
Great. There are very nice comments in the chat on your talk as well. Here's another question, Jannik.
Thank you to the chat.
Yeah, exactly.
Hi, thanks for your talk. Siete Sterrenberg, I'm a study advisor, and we just launched a master program in governance of sustainability transformation. And it feels really native, that program also, and so I'm definitely will connect or forward your information to the design team of the program. But I wondered what exactly the tool is. Is it like a toolbox that you can use to redesign a course or a program or review it, or how does it work?
Yeah, so that's what we are now working towards, to create that toolbox, like you said, with the part of the redesign in brackets. So maybe there's also people that want to redesign new courses, and also a big compliment to the Governance of Sustainability Masters. It looks really cool. But yeah, we are definitely looking for educators who would like to help further develop that toolkit by using it on some of their own courses, or bachelor and master students who would like to do research on this topic as well. Yeah, so I'd love to connect.
Great, that's excellent. Ken, that's the last one before the break, I think.
Sorry for dragging you over again. I found your talk really inspiring. I think the idea of trying to engage with these big challenges is fantastic. We did have some attempts earlier to embed the Sustainable Development Goals in our education here in Wageningen. Mm-hmm. What intrigues me, though, is why you choose the title regenerative education, because in a sense it sort of, does that imply everything else is degenerative? I don't know. but because, I mean, this word regenerative has got a very loaded meaning, I think, these days, particularly around our field of agriculture. Mm. And it's really being hijacked and moved in a very strange direction. I just wondered, why the term regenerative?
Well, first of all, thank you for the question, and it's also something that really concerns me, because when this field started to emerge in the literature, it had that former connotation with regeneration as trying to go back from exceeded boundaries. And you're right that it is indeed being hijacked a bit, and perhaps we need to change at some point the wording, then becomes more of a strategic communication question. But the purpose, to say that all education is destructive or degenerative, that's obviously not what we're trying to do. Although I think a lot of it, at the very best, is neutral in the sense that it doesn't necessarily contribute to bringing that back. So there's both a strategic communication part to that question and also a bit of how you look at sustainability and the challenge that we have. Yeah, thank you. Really nice question.
Thank you, Bas. And I would like to invite you all to applaud for all the speakers for this first session. Very nice. We now take a break. We'll be back here at 11:30 sharp. Welcome back, everybody. Now, as I announced in my introduction, we will have the Research Award ceremony from the Wageningen University Fund. I would like to call to the stage Rumjana Karlova, who is the chair of this year's jury.
Thank you, Bas. Dear ladies and gentlemen, I feel very honored to be giving the Research Award of the University Fund Wageningen to an excellent young researcher today. My name is Rumjana Karlova, and I'm an assistant professor at the Department of Plant Physiology, working on abiotic stress resilience in crops. University Fund Wageningen wants to support and highlight work of gifted young researchers, and so a prize is awarded yearly to a researcher who has published an excellent and original scientific article in the calendar year preceding the ceremony. The entire scientific community of WUR was invited to submit a nomination. A jury composed of Volkert Boersma, Erik van der Linden, a Research Award winner 2021, Irene Sanchez-Andrea, and myself evaluated all nominations. We were very impressed by the quality and creativity of the nominations, together resembling the richness of Wageningen research domain. And we thank all the nominators for the submissions. First, I would like to ask your attention for the runner-ups for this award. The jury would like to give an honorable mention of the number 3 of this year, Urestains, with his paper Scope, enables type 3 CRISPR-Cas diagnostics using flexible targeting and stringent CAV ribonuclease activation. Number 2 has become Pim Desvart and Daniel Gallardo Albaran with their paper, The Demographic Effects of Colonialism, Forced Labor and Mortality in Java, 1834-1879. Congratulations to both. And now it's time to announce the winner of the University Fund Wageningen Research Award 2022, Ernst Jan Egger, for his article entitled Neofunctionalization of SLE genes leads to self-compatibility and facilitates precision breeding in potato, which was published in June 2021 in Nature Communications. Ernst also filed a patent application next to his publication. And the committee was very impressed not only by the scientific quality, but also of the large societal impact of this paper, because plant fertility is crucial for the life cycle of plant species, and especially in parental lines which are used in the production of hybrids. Nowadays, hybrid breeding is not yet applied in potato, and as a result, the genetic gain in traditional potato breeding is very low. The SLE gene identified in this paper is crucial to develop vigorous diploid potato inbred lines. Another big advantage is the fact that hybrid potato varieties grow from true potato seeds and not from tubers, and the seeds can be more easily stored and transported to different parts of the world to the growers. Potato is the third most important food crop in the world, and hybrid breeding will boost the development of new cultivars in this crop, which are more resilient to climate changes and with high yields and tuber quality traits. The jury wants to invite to the stage Ernst Jan Eggers now. Thank you. Congratulations.
Thank you.
First handshake on stage here. If you want to say something, you want to say thank you, and I'll take the flowers. Here's the microphone.
Well,
on the spot, yeah.
I'll keep it short. I'll just like to thank my friends and family for their everlasting support and encouragement. And I want to thank all my colleagues at Solinta and at the Laboratory of Plant Breeding, and in particular my co-authors, two of whom are sitting here, Professor Richard Visser and Dr. Pim Lindhout. Oh, and actually three. Dr. Sjaak van Heusden is also here. But yeah, everybody who helped make this work. You never do any serious work on your own, so it's always a team effort. And I was very lucky to have an excellent team. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. And I was also in the jury for a couple of years, and it's always very, very nice to do this. Excellent work, and only one can win, but well deserved. Now I would very much like to welcome on stage the University and Research, Louise Fresco.
Thank you, Bas. Ladies and gentlemen, how nice to see these exciting awards. And the reason we have these awards is because we have a university fund, Wageningen. And the chair of our university fund, Jan-Karel Mak, has stepped down last Monday after 17 years of service in our university fund, and that is quite unique. And so as an example on him, an honor that we've only given to a very few people in our history. One of them, Jan-Karel, so that you know what we're talking about, was Kofi Annan. So if you can please step on the stage with me, and I'll say a few words about your achievements. Jan-Karel is really what I would like to call, in many ways, an ideal alumnus. Somebody who graduated here, born in 1957, graduated in '83 in environmental engineering. Somebody who really understands the application of science, an entrepreneur, a businessman, but somebody with a huge heart for all things having to do with Wageningen. A sportsman on top of it. And I think that what we have seen throughout the years is this true commitment to our students. You've created our business support to the students. You've worked very hard on some of our campaigns to get extra funding through the University Fund, not least, of course, the Food for Thought. And there is also a lasting piece of Jan Karel and his cronies, I should say, on this very campus. And if you look carefully, you cannot see it. Our campanile, our bell tower, has come into being, not least because of the stringent efforts of Jan Karel. And we're very pleased that we will hear its sound again this afternoon. But Jan Karel has done more. He is really, I think, somebody who is so very much committed to, I would say, to the last minute. So he feels very strongly about everything, which worked very well with the two of us, you can imagine. And Jan Karel really has not only a great heart, but a true commitment to what we are as a university, the interdisciplinarity, the fact that we're not just about teaching and science, but really also about making a true difference in society. That he has done in a very special way. We now have a new university fund set up also under CVC, the corporate value creation, with Sebastian replacing me, incidentally, also as a board member, and a new chair of the board who is sitting on the first row. She has a red dress, and you can congratulate her after this session, Jacqueline Pieterse. So we're starting, in a way, a new chapter. But we didn't want to pass on this moment just in silence, because we owe you a great big thanks of gratitude. Gratitude for your commitment, the time you've put in here, and also your true belief through the ups and downs of the University Fund that this is what we should have. And we're now very proud that we are one of the universities with a very, very good setup where really, I think we're going to look forward towards a new period. And incidentally, we also have a new director of the University Fund who is also sitting on the first row, but not in a red dress, but in something with a zigzag pattern. And so Louise will be here also to meet some of you. So now for the special moment. This is what we call the Silver Award of Honor. As I said, it has gone to Kofi Annan and only very few people in our history. So this is a special moment. It has an inscription which really takes up our own slogan, to explore the potential of nature. You know it? You know it by heart?
No.
To improve the quality of life. Oh. Never mind. This is something I will have to wake up every one of you at night. This is a slogan you should always remember. You may forget a lot of things about Wageningen, but not that. So here we are. This is the solemn moment, and I see you're also wearing our centennial tie with the apples of our history. Thank you. Thank you for everything you've done. Thank you for your commitment, your belief in us, your true understanding of how difficult it is to get a big organization like ours to be flexible enough. And thanks for everything you've brought to the University Fund and by extension to all of us. 17 years in a University Fund, that must be unique in this country. So thank you very much, Jan Karel. Here we are, and enjoy the time beyond the University Fund.
Well, thank you, Louise, for this unique honor that you've bestowed upon me. It's quite a strange feeling to be at the receiving end this time. You said I've been doing this for 17 years. I only became aware of this last week when our director said so. And I thought, why on earth have I been doing this for 17 years? And I could think of 3 reasons. I thought it was fun, it was useful, and it was a learning experience. It was fun to work with great colleagues in the board and in the office of the University Fund. I think it was useful because I think the University Fund contributes to the image and the status of this university. And also, of course, because with our funding, we contribute to research that helps solve societal problems in a very direct way. And it was a learning experience. As a simple entrepreneur,
I didn't use the word simple. Simple is your word. A great entrepreneur.
As an entrepreneur, even after 17 years, I do not fully understand the inner workings of this university. But over the years, I have learned a few things about the reflexes, the decision-making processes, the timing of things, the possibilities and the limitations of the machinery that we call a university. That was a true learning experience for me, which helped me in doing this work. I'm now stepping back. The last 2 years have not been the easiest, but I have immensely enjoyed working on fundraising, on awarding prizes to students, excellent students, great teachers, fantastic researchers. You've seen one this morning. I've enjoyed helping students that needed help here and abroad. And I've enjoyed other things like helping realize this bell tower. I'm very glad, as you said, that we have adapted our statute, and with good intentions we are now ready for the future with the new board members. My successor, Jacqueline Pieters, who took over, and the new director, Louise, as you already mentioned. I thank my colleagues in the board for the past years, and I wish my successors a lot of fun and a lot of success. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. As you know or should know, behind every successful man, there's always a successful partner who has endured all kinds of things. And so I would like, if it is possible, to see the bunch of flowers we had somewhere, to ask Marianne to come on stage for a second and to hand you these flowers for all the hours that Jan Karel wasn't there, or was perhaps physically there, but mentally with the University Fund. Thank you so much, also on behalf of the Executive Board.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't hear the wonderful sound, so I'm just going to continue. And I would very much like to welcome to stage the next speaker of the DS Natalis Symposium. This is Sofia. And she has a very interesting title, Meet Up with Peers.
Thank you. Yeah, dankjewel. Thank you all. It is 8 years ago that when I first walked on the campus of Wageningen University. I was 18, and I just started my bachelor studies, and I knew one thing very sure. I like to research. Now, there were two things, obviously, I wasn't so sure about. Number one, how do I become a researcher? And number two, what would I then want to research? A little flash forward to now. My name is Sofia Wolfswinkel, and I'm standing here today as a PhD candidate of consumption and healthy lifestyle. So clearly, I figured it out. During my master program here at Wageningen, I got the opportunity to partake in the graduate program of Wageningen School of Social Sciences. And here I was invited to take a look into the life of a researcher. I talked to PhD candidates, to teachers and professors to get a wider perspective of what academia entails. But I also got the exciting opportunity to follow advanced master courses that taught me that theories aren't built in a day. It taught me to think critically, dive deeper, and how to write a PhD proposal. And that brings me to the second thing I wasn't so sure about. What would I want to research? this turned out not to be that difficult to figure out, because there's this one topic that caught my attention early on in my studies, and it has fascinated me throughout both my bachelor as well as my master thesis. And clearly it wasn't enough, so I made a PhD project out of it. I'm going to assume that most of you sitting here today are aware that global warming has the clock ticking faster every single day. And it's asking for radical changes in the way we eat. Because currently, we eat too much animal-based and too little plant-based proteins. Simply put, we eat too much meat. And it sounds so easy. If we would all just cut down on 2 beef burgers a week, we would already substantially contribute to the mitigation of climate change. And this is exactly what fascinates me about this topic, because reducing meat sounds like a small task with a large impact, and although the impact can indeed be tremendous, it is also an incredibly complex and delicate challenge. You see, meat consumption is deeply rooted in our Western culture and society. We see this, for example, reflected in the abundance of meat that is available in supermarkets, or think of meat being the central component on your plate. For the Dutch people here, AVG'tje. Or think about the vegetarian items on the restaurant menus that are denoted with a little V or a green leaf to show you that they are different from the default. A dish with meat. We can say that in our current food environment, meat consumption is a social norm. And social norms are unwritten rules that describe behavior that is normal and appropriate in a given context or social group. And social norms are a very powerful driver of behavior. But therefore, they are also considered a barrier in reducing meat consumption. And I'll give you a little example to illustrate. Imagine you're going to a barbecue with your new colleagues. You haven't seen them in a while maybe, or maybe for the very first time in real life. You arrive and you look around you and you see everybody eating burgers, sausages, grilled chicken. You're not going to be the only one opting for the grilled zucchini here, are you? You see how in this specific situation, social norms can withhold you from reducing your meat consumption. But this is just a barbecue with your colleagues. It's just a specific context, situation. But you can imagine that when you see people eating meat around you, and you know it's accepted and appropriate even to do so, all day long, all year round, it is very understandable that you feel hesitant in reducing your meat consumption when nobody else does in your perception. And perception is the key word here, because we may not be aware of it, but we're all confronted with the same social norms. But how we perceive these social norms differs among us. You, for example, may feel like it's a normal and appropriate thing to eat meat in every context. This might be your perception. Well, as for you, it may be more the perception to reduce your meat consumption and opt for vegetarian options more often. How we perceive social norms varies across individuals. And when we're talking about individuals and meat consumption, there is quite a few of them. Over 95% of the Dutch consumers are meat eaters. And my colleagues here at Wageningen University have discovered indications that this group of meat consumers is actually a heterogeneous group. It exists of subgroups. You may, for example, think of the flexitarians, those that are actively trying to reduce their meat consumption. Or think of the group of meat consumers that just eat meat because they've always done so. They don't put that much thought to it, maybe. Or think about the real meat lovers that would do anything to keep their juicy steak on their plate for every single day of the week. But you can imagine that with these different groups of meat consumers, their norm perceptions vary as well. For this group, it might be normal and acceptable in their perception to reduce their meat and eat mostly plant-based and only now and then something with meat. Whereas for this group, it might be the normal and accepted behavior to eat meat in every context and situation. And this group may even be confronted with conflicting norms, not being sure whether meat or meat-free is the norm. Remember how I said that it can feel quite awkward being the only one opting for something vegetarian when nobody else is in your perception. But now imagine that not only this group, but also that group and that group perceive it as the normal and appropriate thing to eat vegetarian or plant-based most of the time. Now you can imagine that it can feel quite awkward being the only one opting for meat, right? Shifting our norms from mostly animal-based protein consumption towards plant-based protein consumption may be a very powerful tool in changing meat consumption, reducing meat consumption. Because we're not consciously thinking about it most of the time, but as humans, we like to be normal and we like to fit in. But changing this norm won't happen overnight, and it won't happen by itself. If we want to shift this norm from meat consumption to meat reduction, we need to thoroughly and better understand the prevailing norms regarding meat consumption. And therefore, in my project to meet up with peers, and indeed, the pun is intended, we investigate how these different groups of meat consumers perceive social norms by setting out cross-sectional surveys and collecting empirical data. But we also investigate how these norms are affecting the meat consumption of these meat consumers. And we are investigating how we can use this knowledge to shift this norm by setting out experiments. The education I received here at Wageningen University has not only provided me with the knowledge and the skills and opportunities that leads to me standing here today, it has also ignited a spark in me that feeds my curiosity and my motivation and inspiration. And by standing here today, I hope I can pass on this spark to students that are passionate about research as well. And maybe, hopefully, I can inspire you a little bit to start changing that norm and eat something vegetarian when you're around meat eaters. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There's time for questions, comments. Who can I invite in the audience and also online? There's an opportunity to type in the chat. There's a little bit of delay, so I'll start with the audience here in the spot. Anybody? Maybe I can start the ball rolling then. And that's so when you talk about norms, I was thinking about what that exactly means. Is that also including customs, what is customary, habits, cultural aspects,
right.
Or is it, because norm can also mean, what's right and what's wrong. Could you say a bit about that?
Well, yeah, like I said, the definition of norms is what we perceive as normal and appropriate. And I actually had a very interesting discussion with my co-promoters on how this ties to habits, and I can imagine they were related. I must say I don't have the knowledge here to say that with all certainty. But I can certainly imagine that, for example, habits are triggered in a certain context, right? And this can also be when you're with friends, for example, wherever you are. So I can definitely imagine that this ties to social norms, which are also triggered in a given context and situation. So I would actually be very interested to learn more about that. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I'm also looking at my iPad. No questions. Other questions from the audience? There's a question in the back. Yolie?
Yeah. Question on whether in a family setting, who's an influencer? Can you influence behavioral or tastes and preferences, like a mother or a father to children? Have you investigated anything on that when it comes to diet?
Right. So the question is, thank you for your question, by the way. The question is who influences. It depends, honestly. For example, when we're talking about being confronted with conflicting norms, following the theory of, this is all based on Cialdini focused theory of normative conduct, we would say that you would follow the norm that is salient to you. But what is salient? Maybe because you see everybody around you eating meat, this may be very salient to you, and then that your friends might be like, oh, that's not a good thing to eat meat. But when you're around the people that are, maybe it might be more salient to you to eat meat, and you would do so. But it really depends. Yeah, but it's an interesting question. Thank you. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
This will be the last one for this session. So, in a good part of South Asia, making people opt for non-meat options is also significantly about approaching them through their culture, not necessarily as a matter of prescription or economics. How to do that on a global scale?
Could you maybe repeat it once more?
What I got from this question is that opting for non-meat would work well through sort of the cultural aspects rather. And how would you do that then on a global scale? So it actually relates, I think, to a bit my question, I think.
Right. Well, it's like I said, it's an incredibly complex task. I don't think I am capable to say how to do this on a global scale. I do believe that you have to implement and make it normal in all layers of society, and eventually, hopefully, get to a more global aspect. But it's a very difficult question. Yeah, thank you. It's very challenging.
Okay, well, good luck with your research.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So on stage with me now is Ina, and she will be talking about governing uncertain futures. And I think this is a very well chosen title, given the state of the world today. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Bas, for the introduction. And hi, everyone. So my name is Ina Möller. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the Environmental Policy Group here in Wageningen. And what I want to talk about today is teaching and learning about the politics of climate change and how we prepare our students to face an increasingly uncertain future. What you see in the background here is a short video that I recorded in the city center of Lund in southern Sweden, where I used to work and study before I came to the Netherlands. It shows a small part of an increasingly growing youth movement that is questioning the actions, or rather the inactions, of policymakers on the topic of climate change, and that is therefore endangering their futures. Now, these students have all reason to protest. As we heard earlier from the other Bas, just 10 days ago, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change published its latest report. And I think my colleagues will agree in saying that this is the bleakest outlook that you've ever heard issued from this organization. Even if we manage to drastically reduce our emissions today, the amount of greenhouse gases that are already in the atmosphere and the emissions trends that we're locked into now mean that we will experience unavoidable climate impacts through 2040. The report estimates that just in the next decade, up to 132 million more people will be pushed into extreme poverty by climate change. Climate change will affect food security. It will increase the frequency of the incredible wildfires that we saw in the last years. And it will enable the spread of diseases like malaria and cholera. Not a very good prospect. Given the circumstances, many people are saying that we should start focusing on removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And one way, or the most popular way, that is being discussed or suggested on how to do this is to plant vast amounts of trees. Now, tree planting sounds easy, right? Everybody likes trees. Why should there be a problem with this? In fact, the scale at which we would have to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere raises some very complex political questions. Take the tree planting example. Where would all these trees be planted? Whose land would we use? What kinds of effects would it have on food production and biodiversity protection? What if these trees die because of disease or heat, which we know is coming with a changing climate, and thereby become sources of carbon dioxide rather than sinks? And how would the future promise, or the promise of being able to remove carbon dioxide in the future, affect our efforts at reducing greenhouse gases today? Given the challenges of carbon dioxide removal, we know that this is going to take a long time. We don't know whether it will be effective. And we know that we're already experiencing the impacts of climate change today. Some are saying that we need to look into more drastic measures of addressing climate change. For example, we know that when volcanoes erupt, they spew large amounts of sulfuric aerosols into the upper atmosphere, into the stratosphere, and thereby reflect incoming sunlight. In this way, global temperatures drop in a very short amount of time. Now, some scientists are suggesting that we should learn to imitate this effect and use it to our advantage. But we also know that if we do something like this, then we would have to do it for a very long time. And this is because once we start putting aerosols into the stratosphere, we would have to do it until a point in time where the amount of CO2 that we now have in the atmosphere is at the same level as what we started as. As a political scientist, I then need to ask, do we have institutions that can govern this kind of intervention, perhaps for hundreds of years? What would happen if something goes wrong? Who would take responsibility? Who would pay? And who, in the first place, has the authority and power to make such a decision, to use an intervention at global scale that will affect lives all over the world? This is where my research comes in. As a PhD and postdoc, I've been looking at the politics of what we call climate engineering. And in September last year, a colleague of mine, Julia Schubert, and I organized a workshop at which we brought together scientists and policymakers to think about how the politics of climate engineering are taking shape in different real-world settings. We wanted to know, what do we need to study? What do we need to focus on in order to improve our decision-making capacity to address these very complex questions that we will soon be facing, or are already facing? During the workshop, we also invited a number of students to participate. One of them was Elinor van Driel, one of my master's thesis students, who came and presented her research on public participation in the decision-making around stratospheric aerosol injection. And Elinor found that, contrary to what much of the social science literature suggests, her interviewees were actually very skeptical about including civil society and the public at large in making these kinds of decisions. The young people that she interviewed were very concerned about a topic like this becoming polarized, and they preferred that elected decision makers engage with this and make decisions. Now, this caused quite some stir amongst us, because as good critical social scientists as we are, we all imagine civil society participating in this to be a core part of decision-making on stratospheric aerosol injection. But I think Eleanor showed us that sometimes it's good to question the truisms that are put out there that we all take for granted. And it showed us that including the perspectives of future decision makers is just as important as including the perspectives of current ones. And this is basically what we teach here at Wageningen. We prepare students to participate in these kinds of societally relevant debates. At the Environmental Policy Group, where I work, we prepare students with a diverse toolbox of concepts and theories that they can use in a flexible manner to better understand the social and political world that they encounter. Here I have a picture of me teaching students how to graphically visualize some of the more abstract concepts that they're engaging with, and thereby improving their communication skills and their methods of scientific operationalization. The creative use of these kinds of graphics can also help understand complex political systems by identifying the key elements that are part of the system, how the system hangs together, and what are key leverage points at which one might start affecting change. And here again, you see the prize-winning poster of this year's International Environmental Policy course, in which students were tasked with analyzing different international environmental regimes. A third thing that we do at the Environmental Policy Group is to prepare students for political negotiation and debate. And one of the things that I like to focus on here is really putting a focus on empathy and on kindness. We want students to understand different perspectives. By slipping into the roles of actors that have a fundamentally different worldview from themselves, we teach them how to understand these actors' interests and their concerns. We hope that, therefore, they'll be able to find common ground in negotiation and come up with creative solutions to entrenched political problems. Now, in the last 2 years here at Wageningen, I've only been here for 2 years, but in that time that I've been here, one thing I've learned about the students who come is that they have a commonality in a desire to make the world a better place. And as a lecturer, I take strength and inspiration from that desire. And it gives me the motivation to do everything that I can in order to help them transition from expressing their opinions in the streets to gaining a seat at the global decision-making table. As a researcher who studies the politics of climate change, I know that the worry, concern, and frustration that characterizes this field can be a very heavy burden to carry. But I also know that the enthusiasm and dedication that I see in some of our students makes every moment of that worth it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Ina, questions, comments from the audience first. Who can I give the floor? Well, and it's a bit of a tradition. I'll start the ball rolling. So it's nice that you used role play for the negotiation techniques. But I was wondering whether you could also use sort of the native differences of opinion that are maybe there in the students, or is everybody so much on the same page already that you cannot use that? Because I think role play is nice, but at the same time, it's not your real conviction. So, and that's what I think is obstructing a lot of the progress in the climate debate. I would say.
Absolutely. No, some of the things that I do now in this course that I was telling about is to explore what kinds of worldviews are out there. And I ask students to also identify their own worldview and engage in discussions with each other to compare what kind of worldview do they fit in. Are there several worldviews that maybe combine in their own perspective? How does it compare with their peers? And it really, I think, opens their eyes towards the existence of these different worldviews and helps them understand why sometimes when they engage in projects. So many of the students are involved in also political projects and helping kind of different organizations to analyze a problem, why they sometimes encounter challenges in communicating with the people who are part of this project. And it helps them, yeah, I think it does help them understand that.
So maybe you should invite some politicians to your course too.
Yeah, no, certainly.
Other questions, comments from the audience? I don't see a comment online either. Yet.
It's a heavy subject to digest, I guess.
Yeah, but I mean, yeah, it is. But I like the way that you were ending, because I also experienced it sometimes in students that, you know, as a teacher, you're sending out a, well, sometimes rather depressing a signal, and then you're also from the generation that the young Swedes were protesting against. So
absolutely,
it's good to address that.
Yeah.
But there's also indeed ways out, hopefully.
I think just building on that, it's very visible from our students who come especially to the policy department that they have very grand hopes of changing the world in the future, and we as lecturers have to make sure that that hope isn't dampened too much, because of course, like, engaging with these social systems, you understand that it's very difficult to affect change. Yeah. So a major challenge for us lecturers is to still convey enough hope and tools and understandings of how to actually be able to change the system. That includes critical analysis, of course. It's not all about finding ready-made solutions to issues, but understanding how to understand the system in order to, you know, where to start. So I think that's what we try and communicate.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, joining me on stage is Michiel, and he is also one of these students that did a master here and then obtained their own PhD trajectory. And that's what you're going to talk about. So it's about spores of an organism that causes potato blight. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Bas. Yeah, so I am Michiel Kasteel, and I'm a PhD student at the laboratories of cell biology and phytopathology. And although I am also, to stay in the theme of today, also quite involved with teaching, my teaching is mainly at the laboratory of cell biology, meaning that I teach quite intensively on the fundamentals of plants. However, my subject is on the opponents of plants. I study plant diseases. And although it might not always be as visible when you go to the supermarket and see these pitch-perfect vegetables and fruits lying around, plant diseases are a huge threat that we have to deal with. It's estimated that up to 25% of crops are lost before they even get to our table. Of course, many types of pathogens are causing these losses, but the ones I'm studying belong to the group of Phytophthora. Quite an ominous name already. As directly translated, it means destroyers of plants. And some of you might already be familiar with one of these species. It's Phytophthora infestans and causes potato-late blight, and is quite notorious for having caused the Great Irish Famine in 1845. But of course, there are many other species of Phytophthora, all devastating, such as Pamivera in the tropics on cocoa, but also Capsicum now more and more in our greenhouses on peppers and cucurbits. Although the disease that these Phytophthora species cause might resemble what you might find on your sandwich when you leave it out a bit too long, fungi and molds start sprouting on them, they are actually genetically very distinct from these organisms. Oomycetes, to which the Phytophthora genus belongs to, is a unique group in the tree of life, as distinct from fungi as you and I are from plants. This means that many control strategies that we have developed to combat fungi do simply not work to combat these oomycetes. And worse yet, as being a pathogen, like we've encountered for COVID the past couple of years, they are simply very adaptive, and these oomycetes are no exception, meaning that the control methods we do still have left in place can be easily overcome by these pathogens. We are thus in a continuous arms race to stay ahead, develop novel control methods, and keep our plants safe and healthy. What I try to do in my studies is look at the life cycle of these oomycetes and have a look at it if we can find unique or weak spots that we can target for these novel control methods that we keep on having to develop. Previously, we have already looked at how these oomycetes actually get into the plant. And we found that it did so in an entirely different manner as their fungal counterparts, using a slicing mechanism that's more reminiscent of the way guillotine blades or kitchen knives cut. But that's not what I'll be talking about today. Today, I want to tell you a bit more about how these diseases disperse via their spores. This is such a spore. From a single plant, Phytophthora is able to release thousands of these agents, and they spread through fields like wildfire. As you can see, these spores are motile, and that's why we also call them zoospore, mobile spores. And you can imagine that this can be quite advantageous. If you can move, you can actively find the plant that you're interested in infecting. And that does seem to be the case. If we look at where these zoospores end up, on the right we see that they end up on roots specifically, on the middle we see they specifically end up on leaves. But interestingly, we can also lure these zoospores in by providing them with a very simple amino acid that we extract from, for example, root exudates. In this case, on the right, we're looking at the zoospores being attracted to the amino acid glutamic acid. And I was looking at this very simple experiment, and I thought, it seems to be quite easy to distract these zoospores. So might there be some way in which we can exploit the mobility of this pathogen to develop these novel control methods? Well, to do that, I first wanted to have a look at these zoospores, because these are all pictures in hindsight, but I wanted to look at how these zoospores swim. And to do that, I needed to, well, gather up some different disciplines that help me to actively monitor these zoospores. So I work together with 3 different labs. Francine Govers from Phytopathology is an expert on oomycete fundamentals and helps me understand these organisms. Thijs Ketelaar from Cell Biology is an expert on live cell microscopy and helps me develop these chambers that I want to visualize these oomycetes in and help me monitor them via microscopy. And Joris Sprakel from Physical Chemistry helps me with quantitatively describing how these zoospores actually move. So how does that look like? We see zoospores in these chambers swimming around quite happily. And what we then do is follow these zoospores over time. And through this, we get trajectories of how these zoospores have moved, which we can then extract and analyze individually. These are some of these trajectories that we get. You can see that these zoospores not only move in straight stretches, they also make very sudden turns. They look a bit like this. And this strategy of running and tumbling is something we know from all the way from bacteria up to human hunter-gatherers as a very effective strategy to utilize your mobility to scour a big area for food sources, for example. So this mobility turns out to be paramount to the infectivity of these organisms. When we were studying a mutant that we thought was deficient in signal perception, we found that its swimming patterns, as we can see on the left, are completely deviating from that we find in the wild type of normal zoospores to do so. And that led to these zoospores no longer being able to infect leaves anymore, as we can see in the middle panel. Well, we thought about, okay, so why is this swimming making sure that these zoospores are no longer able to infect? And when we checked whether they were still able to perceive these signals, in this case, again, this chemoattractant glutamic acid that I've already mentioned, we found that they no longer aggregated around the source that we provided. So apparently, this aggregation mechanism is crucial for these oomycetes to infect. But how do they actually aggregate? How do they translate the signals that we provide them with into movement that results in them ending up there? To investigate that, we simply added this chemoattractant I've already mentioned a couple of times, this glutamic acid, in doses to these zoospores. And we had a look at how these swimming patterns changed. And as you can see, they have changed quite drastically. It seems like these runs have become shorter and these tumbles have become much more apparent. Well, so what does that mean for how these zoospores behave? If we overlay all the trajectories that we gathered for all the single zoospores and put them on top of each other, we get an idea, and that's on the lower graph, of how far these zoospores get. And what becomes immediately apparent is that these zoospores effectively travel less and less. You could argue they become entrapped. Now, of course, from these top pictures, we want, of course, to validate that this is actually the case. So we want to see what are actually the parameters that are directly affected by this chemoattractant. Well, one of the things we want to know, okay, is the velocity these zoospores travel with affected? That did not turn out to be the case. When we increase the concentration of glutamic acid, the speed at which these zoospores swim is not affected. But of course, they don't only swim in straight stretches, they also tumble. So what we had already gleaned from these images, is it true that they tumble more? That does turn out to be the case. When we increase the concentration of glutamic acid, we see that these zoospores start tumbling more and more until it's all they do. So it seems that simply tuning your tumbling frequency in response to a chemoattractant is sufficient to stay in one place. And that's of course very reminiscent of the picture I've already showed you a couple of times. Zoospores ending up at the source of a chemoattractant altogether. Well, to validate this, we wanted to evaluate whether indeed this tumbling was sufficient to explain this behavior we saw here. And we did that through a model. So in these models, we simply had a source of a chemoattractant diffuse from a point, right in the middle. Then, to this model, we add zoospores, simulated zoospores, which we only told to, if you encounter a chemoattractant, you start tumbling more heavily. And it turns out that these zoospores, only with this very basic instruction, are all able to end up in the same spot, the highest concentration of chemoattractant. All right, so what does that now mean for these control strategies that I've been talking about in the very beginning? We have shown that by messing with swimming patterns, we can prevent these zoospores from ever getting to the plant. They are no longer infectious. But also that it's very easy to distract these zoospores with a single amino acid and maybe perhaps lure them away from something. And I think this is where two novel options lie for control strategies. For a unique stage in this oomycete's life cycle, we can either start working on blocking the perception of these zoospores, making sure they're no longer able to find these plants, or we can start developing traps in which we can lure zoospores away from plants, in which way they also never reach them. Okay, I want to leave it at that. Of course, I thank the people of all the laboratories I work with, and for today, I especially thank Joris, Tarun, Thijs, Francine, and Remco for helping me with the results.
Thank you very much. Comments, questions, fascinating topic, especially the fact that they're so different from us as we are from plants, fungi. It's incredible, you don't realize this. Nice that you reminded me of that. Questions from the audience, and online also obviously the possibility to ask a question. Just wait for the microphone. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, Romana.
Very nice talk, thank you. If you develop these traps, do you think you might also interfere with the microbiome or other organisms that could be attracted by glutamic acid? We also, as humans, could taste it.
Without question, you will be interfering with all other kinds of processes in the soil. The question is, how heavily do you do so? Normally, these batches of glutamic acid, they are exuded in quite large quantities already by the root exudates themselves. So definitely there are organisms that profit from this. You would need a separate study to see how heavily it would affect that. One more thing I would like to add is, of course, this is a very general example of a chemoattractant, but we also find that plants exude very specific chemoattractants to which these zoospores respond, isoflavones, for example. So there's a whole scala of kinds of substances we can try out to lure these zoospores.
But that you think is indeed the way forward? The more specific, the better, or not?
Yeah. Of course, in the end, it's likely that we need to integrate multiple disciplines, so not only novel crop protection agents, very specific against these types of organisms, intercropping, plant breeding. I think you need all of these, but specificity is key, because off targets we are starting to learn is something you do not want to.
No.
Well,
indeed. Yeah, we have too many not good examples in that respect. Great. Other questions from the audience? Because I have one. And that's maybe a bit too technical, and arguably you probably had the size of that container that you were following the spores in. And I also presume it was three-dimensional, or was it sort of more akin to a cover slide? And because I was wondering how natural that is, because I guess mostly they would be swimming through the soil, so to speak, and finding these sort of wetter areas, etc. So how well does what you did in the lab fit to what might happen in sort of a natural field?
Yeah, so the chambers we have are about 200 microns thick. So there's more room than just a cover slip, but you can stack about, well, I think 20 of these zoospores on top of each other before they reach the ceiling. So they do have some room to swim. Of course, you can consider that they have to navigate the rhizosphere, and that means a lot of barriers. So that might mean that they also need to adapt swimming patterns, not only to move somewhere, but also to escape from clogs in the soil. But there's of course diversity in this. Some oomycetes are completely soil bound, but some are also they disperse via the sporangia. I'll not get much into it, but it's a husk in which these zoospores can travel and then be released when they get to the plant. And then of course you might have more of a water film on top of this plant in which they do navigate like this. But together with Joris, we are definitely capable of looking more into how the architecture of these chambers influences these zoospores' ability to react to signals. Yeah, so.
Great, thanks. Well, thank you, Michiel. So, we have come to the end of this symposium. And it's time for a few thank yous. And I would like to start with, of course, the 7 speakers for their excellent contribution. I think it was a very, very nice showcase of how education and research tie in with one another and can strengthen one another. So it was very, very nicely done. So thank you. And I would like to thank also Janneke, Fenny and Ingrid for putting the program together. So on paper it sort of works, but then you see the reality, it works even better. So thank you very much for your efforts. Both on, So this was on the content part, and obviously the technique and everything that makes this possible. I would like to mention Daniela, Susanne and Heidi for this, and also an applause for them. And then last but not least, thank you for being here and being present and asking the questions, both here in the spot as well as online. So the program this is not the end of the whole program of today, so at 15:30 there will be the next phase of the celebrations, arguably a bit more formal part. And for those who want to watch that online, you can use the exact same link as you've been using to watch this event. With that, I wish you a good day and hope to see you soon again. Thank you.